What's really going on, everybody? We are back again, episode number 69. Before we get into it, please be sure to follow us on social media at WRGO Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Be sure to check out our new merchandise that is celebrating change agents. That includes the late John Lewis, the new Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock, and Stacey Abrams. You can check those out at what's really going on pod.com/shop. We have a special guest today, one who is very special to me. The three of us, each of us, Mackenzie, Henry, and myself, we all have different origin stories. Henry in the communication space, Mackenzie in the journalist space, and me in the political space. That is because this guest that we have knocked on my door and told me to come work for him in the summer of 2014. So we are proud to be joined by Montgomery County Councilman at Large, Will Jawando. Councilman, how are you doing?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Noah, and Henry and Mackenzie. And I don't know if I told you or if I asked you, I don't know, but either way, either way you listen. So I'm appreciative. Yeah. So I'm doing well. It's good to be with you all.
Yeah, of course. So I think the first question that we have is obviously, COVID surrounds our world. Before we recorded, we had a conversation about, your kids and how, you're all in the house and what that's like. You recently called Governor Hogan's executive order that would lift capacity restrictions irresponsible. What course do you wish that the governor kind of would have taken with regard to COVID restrictions?
Yeah, well, I did say it was irresponsible, and I still feel that way. And unfortunately, I would have liked to be wrong about that assessment, but we're seeing now, just even a week, 10 days after he opened up the state, which included opening up indoor dining restrictions and bars right ahead of St. Patrick's Day. We're already seeing case counts go up across the state. We have multiple variants. All three of the variants are present here, the UK, the Brazilian, and then there's the New York variant, and there's other variants that are forming. And we only have about 12% of our population vaccinated. And when you look at the disparities, white residents have received 4 times vaccination of Black residents in a state where Black residents make up 31% of the population. And that's certainly true in my county. It's true in Prince George's County. It's true in Baltimore City and County and other places. And as I mentioned, we were talking before we came on, my kids went back to school this week for the first time. 19,000 elementary school kids in Montgomery County Public Schools went back to school. Others are set to go back in middle school and high school in April. And why would we endanger that by opening up restaurants and bars and making it less safe while we don't have enough of our population vaccinated? I think the prudent step would have been to wait until the president said we're going to have enough vaccinations for everyone 16 and above by the end of May. We needed to continue to take a cautious approach. And that's what we've done in Montgomery County. We have the lowest case rate in the state, I think, because of that, even though we're the largest jurisdiction and most diverse jurisdiction. So I just think it was irresponsible without the amount of vaccinations and the inequity in vaccination. And we're trying to reopen school. It just was not a smart move. It was an economic, political move, not a health-based move.
I can agree with that, especially being in Georgia where they're not taking any precautions. They're just like, we're open. Come on, we're not worried about anything. So you kind of mentioned how, others have more access than Black and brown communities. And as a member of the legislative branch, I would like to know, what steps have you or anyone that that you're working with on any committees have taken to ensure that there's access for us as Black and brown people to get the vaccine?
Yeah, it's a great question, Henry. And yeah, you're right. I know it's always relative, right? In other parts of the country, Georgia and Florida, they're in Texas, they said you don't even have to wear a mask. It's just, so it's a lot of craziness going on that unfortunately is going to cost people their life. And it's so, what couple things we're doing in the vaccine equity, we were really intentional about how we use our vaccinations that we get at our health department. Right now we're receiving, next week we'll receive, for example, about 8,000 doses in our health department. And we are targeting those doses to the hardest hit zip codes where COVID has hurt our communities the most. And that is in our Black and Latino zip codes. And so we've set up clinics in those areas. We're giving prioritization to those people that live in those zip codes. I've actually called on us to go a step further and open up vaccine eligibility to younger Black and Latino residents. If you look at the average age, life expectancy of a Black person in this country, it's around 70 years old. So when you were vaccinating the 75 plus, we are disproportionately automatically going to get less vaccination because we don't have as many people. And then when you look at who dies when they get COVID, a 55 to 64-year-old Black resident or Latino resident dies at a higher rate than a 65 to 74-year-old white or Asian resident who gets COVID. So we die 10 years younger, we get sicker. And so I think we need to lower that eligibility. Just like you would if two people came to the hospital, one is bleeding out and the other one has a cut, you're going to go and help and triage the person who needs the help. So when you have limited vaccine, you have to do that. And that's where we're at right now. Hopefully in the next coming weeks and months, we have more vaccine. You're still going to have inequity problems because, people don't have transportation. They don't have fast internet. They don't know how to navigate the websites. So there's a whole host of issues, but we've prioritized by zip code. I hope we'll take this next step on lowering the age for Black and Latino residents. We're actually going to be talking about that next week. I'm going to be introducing a Board of Health regulation to do that. We're also doing mobile visits, to people who can't get out in communities that are hard hit. So we're doing a whole range of things. The unfortunate part is we only get 8,000 doses. We have 1.1 million residents. So 8,000 doses a week, you can do the math. It's going to take a long time. We need everyone else to have that equity strategy. So we pushed the governor for the doses he's given to pharmacies and hospitals. They need to have the same type of approach. Right now, it's just if you got a fast internet and you've got a car, you can get online, find your dose and get it. And that's what's happening. And that's why you have the inequity. So the final thing I'll say is we push for a mass vaccination site in our jurisdiction and a single registration system. You all know, if you've got to go to 12 different sites to try to find a site, that's just inequitable right off the bat. And that's what a lot of people are having to do. So those are some of the things we're doing here and some of the things we're advocating for.
Yeah. So speaking about you pushing for things and advocating for things, you recently tweeted about your introduction of special appropriation that would create support for small businesses and rental assistance programs for other small businesses. What would you hope that this funding does, and what would it look like to be supported?
Yeah, thanks, Mackenzie. That's a really important question. One of the most devastating things about what I have called, and I'm not the only one, but I've been saying it for a while, there are at least 3 pandemics going on. There's the COVID health pandemic where, 500,000 plus people have died. Many more have been sick. It's obviously been disproportionate in who has the highest case count, communities of color, who has died the most. Then you have the economic fallout, right? Who has lost their job, who is having to put themselves as a frontline worker at risk, who has lost their home or can't pay their rent, how many businesses have closed. And that's what this appropriation is targeted at. The third, just to finish that thought, the third pandemic is the racial and social justice pandemic, right? We can't forget that in June, we watched a murder for 10 minutes when George Floyd had a state-sanctioned murder, knees on his neck. Breonna Taylor was shot in her home with an illegal warrant, and Ahmaud Arbery was chased down by vigilantes. We go too many to list. And Jacob Blake. So, but on this economics front, we have almost half of Black businesses that are small Black businesses are gone, gone, shuttered, closed nationally. 70% of those that remain, in a recent poll just last month, said that they're going to run out of cash in the next 3 months or less. And so what's the number one driver for a small retail Black or brown or women-owned business? It's your rent. And we have a lot of folks that are struggling to keep their space. As the economy reopens, they've got to be there so that they can have business. And so what this is targeted at, this is a $1.5 million appropriation that's targeted specifically at women-owned, Black and Latino-owned businesses that make less than $500,000 a year. So these are small businesses, somewhere between 1 and 6 employees usually. that are really the majority of businesses in the country. You know, in our
Mhm.
county, for example, they make up businesses that have less than 10 people make up 60% of the businesses. And so, and they're disproportionately businesses of color. You know, these, you think of your small grocery store, your esthetician, your nail salon, you know, go down the list. And so they have also been disproportionately excluded or not in receipt of the PPP money and other
Yeah.
state and local funds. So this is targeting it just for them, so they don't have to get in line with everybody else. And we're doing $10,000 or up to 3 months rent, whichever is the lower number. And so they'll be able to, that'll have a committee hearing next week and hopefully pass shortly thereafter. And we can get that money in their hands, because we have to, you know, try to keep these businesses alive for the communities, but also for the people they employ and for the residents that live in those communities.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate to hear that, because I can't count on two hands how many GoFundMes I've supported throughout the pandemic to keep businesses open. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, and to continue on kind of the economic piece that you had spoken about, we know that in December you introduced the More Housing for More People, some of that legislation that sought to protect the rights of renters. What caused you to write the bill, and what problem are you trying to fix with its introduction?
You know, we had a housing crisis before the pandemic, right? But it's just been made even worse in our county, but across the country. It's expensive. Housing is expensive, and you know, you're trying to figure it out. And if you lost your job, that's difficult. So the first thing we did, even before this latest package, was I introduced a rent stabilization bill that passed that said you can't raise rent during the pandemic, right? You would think it would make sense. No one should be raising rent, but we were getting, you know, reports of people raising rents and taking advantage during the pandemic. And so we passed that. Then we put out over $20 million in rental assistance, you know, $4,000 to $6,000 a month for folks who are falling behind. But you remember, this has happened for over a year, right? You know, so some people have been out of work for a year, and things have stacked up. And now we have courts starting to reopen, and they're preparing to process evictions, right? And that's a big issue. So more housing for more people is like, how do we build more housing, different housing types at different price points, so that we can try to bring the cost down, because it's supply demand. If you have more housing, theoretically the cost comes down, but that's not enough, because, you know, people want to build expensive housing, right? So you got to try to have some requirement for affordability. And then you have to protect renters. And so the other bill is an anti-rent gouging bill that would cap rent increases to around, you know, 3% a year, so that people can have consistency and know how much their rent's going to go up. Right now, you have someone comes in and they get a notice for 10%. If you're paying $1,000 a month and they're saying, all right, next year you're paying $1,100, that's going to matter for a lot of people.
Right.
It shouldn't happen. So that's what those two proposals are. It would allow different housing types near metro and near transit, and then protect renters who live in those corridors where the rent is usually the highest, and try to keep that price at a consistent level so that they can stay there. So that's what those proposals are about.
It's interesting you speak about the quarters of people who stay around that metropolitan area, which is typically heavily police, which will kind of transition to our next question. In Montgomery County, you've been like one of the leading voices on police reform, which I personally appreciate. There has been a lot more of attention paid on the issue of police accountability and like reforms since the killings, like you said earlier, of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which was like almost a year ago. What do you think is the chance of you achieving any, like, you know, accountability or progress in Montgomery County towards police reform?
Well, you know, it's a great question. First, I'll say we've done some, and I'm happy to say that, but there's more to do, right? You know, I'm never satisfied. We've got a lot of work to do. You know, policing is, as you all know, is wrought with a history that is based in white supremacy. The first police forces were formed in the Carolinas in the 1700s as slave patrols to round up escaped enslaved individuals. And then the police were used to enforce discrimination and anti-voting rights and LGBTQ rights. labor unions. And so they've been used as a weapon for a lot of their history. And so you understand why communities don't have that trust. And when you look at the stats, who's been arrested and for what, it's completely disproportionate, right? The 2 million people we have in jail, a lot of them look like you and I on this call. And that's because of discriminatory policies and enforcement and prosecution. So the system, unfortunately, has functioned the way it was designed to function and put certain people in jail and denied liberty to them. So, and taken their life in the case of George Floyd and so many others, right? That didn't just happen. It just happened that people saw it, right? Some people who didn't know it was happening saw it for the first time in a brutal and horrible way. So we've done a couple things. We passed, the first bill I introduced when I got elected was an independent investigation bill that requires anytime an officer kills a resident, our police shouldn't be investigating that. You need an independent body to come in and investigate it so that there's transparency and accountability. And then that report, every witness testimony, what happened, it all needs to be made public, because that's when the public needs to know what happened for accountability, but also so that we can change whatever we need to change as far as policy so it doesn't happen again, right? It's unacceptable if an unarmed Black or brown person gets killed and we're just like, oh, well, it happened, I'm sorry. No, we have to make changes. We have to make changes so in our policy and our recruitment and what we prioritize in our accountability system so that it doesn't happen again. So we passed that. Then this summer, after George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor were murdered, we passed a use of force policy, a sweeping use of force policy, banning, knees to the neck and banning no-knock warrants in drug cases. I wanted to get them all gone completely, but I had to compromise. But drug cases are over 50% of the no-knock warrants, including the one in Breonna's house. Banning shooting at moving vehicles, requiring officers to intervene if they see an officer committing a crime, like in the case of Derek Chauvin. Those other officers stood there and watched. Right now, they could be held liable if they don't intervene. So things like that, some of the real basic things that should be happening already, but that aren't in a lot of jurisdictions. And then we raised the standard of when deadly force can be used. Right now, the biggest problem with this is that an officer gets off, and the reason we don't see convictions is if they reasonably believed that their life was in danger, right? And they thought the force was reasonable. And that's a very broad standard. And leaves a lot of, open interpretation. We raised the standard to the force had to be necessary, and there were no other alternatives that could have been used that were less lethal. And that will help on the back end. Hopefully it doesn't happen on the front end, but it'll help deter this for us to hold people accountable if that force was not necessary and there could have been less lethal or no force used at all, which is in some of these situations. So we passed that, but there's more we have to do. We have to change who we recruit, how we train them, what we tell them to do, where we deploy them. So I'm working on proposals in all those areas. And we need more community involvement and discipline, right? And transparency on knowing which officers have done what and what their records are. A lot of those times those records are sealed and they get extra rights that they shouldn't have when they do something wrong, and they don't have to talk to someone or make a report for several days and things like that. So we're working on all of those things. You can't fix a system that's been going for 400 years overnight, but we have to, because as you all know, it's producing, death and in the worst case, but in a lot of other cases, trauma, getting in the way of employment and education opportunities and incarceration. So we've got to fix the system.
It's good to hear that you're actively taking on that, especially when you highlight issues of how it affects the youth of Black and brown communities. And I know, and Noah has kind of made it aware to both of us that you've been actively trying to get police removed from Montgomery County's public schools. How do you think the work you're doing there will aid that?
One of the things with police reform is we need to change what they focus on and where they are and who they're interacting with. Mm-hmm. And the problem is you get disproportionality when you have police responding to things they shouldn't be responding to. Schools is a perfect example. A school should be a place of safety, place of support, place of love, a place of education, not a place where of enforcement, right? Now, that doesn't mean we're trading safety right? We have security guards, we have restorative justice. One of the things I just passed was $750,000 for restorative justice training, which is a proven model that reduces the need for disparate discipline and arrest. And it's going to train all of our staff in 40 middle schools, 1,400 staff in this kind of approach. We need psychologists, we need counselors, we need crisis intervention counselors. We need, in some cases, in some of our schools, we need street outreach networks or gang intervention units where you have violence interrupters. There's a lot of solutions out there that don't involve a police officer with a gun patrolling the hallways. Because what you get when you have that is 50% of the people arrested in our schools are Black, even though Black students make up 20% of the population. And then you get our Latino students about 28% of the arrest, and students with disabilities disproportionately arrested. That's what you get when you have police in schools. They're not, that's what not, and I'm not saying they shouldn't come in for programmatic functions, you know, assemblies, traffic help, all those. Sure, let's build those positive relationships, but they don't need to be in the schools in an enforcement capacity. And so we're making progress. I think in the next several weeks, actually, we'll be able to announce that we are going to be removing our police from our schools. It's been a battle, and we're going to be making these investments in these other supports, psychologists, nurses, social workers, that our kids need, particularly coming back from COVID, you know. And so I think it's an example of, like mental health, like we don't need our police responding when someone's dealing with a mental health crisis, right? It's particularly if they're nonviolent. You know, people dealing with substance abuse, homelessness, those are not things that should be criminalized. And we need to get our police out of that business and have them focus on violent crime, on things that most people think police should be focused on. And right now we have them doing too much of the other, which is leading to disproportionality, but it's also not effective. They're not solving these other bigger crimes either. So that's part of the shift that we need to do right now, and schools is part of that.
Now, in January, your bill to address workplace discrimination became very effective. What has been done to eliminate discrimination and abusive workplaces in Montgomery County?
We've done a couple things. We introduced the Crown Act and passed it. You know, you see my twists here, and I see your natural hair, and I see Noah, and then we've all got a protected hairstyle here.
I got a little something.
You got a little something. You got a little something there. You know, a little something. But you know, so we passed the Crown Act, which is the Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. And what that did is it provided legal protection, saying that hair discrimination is race discrimination, right? And because previously you couldn't have that protection. You know, if you had an afro, you had locks or twists, the court would throw your case out if you were told or fired from UPS, or there's tons of cases of this happening. So now you can't be discriminated against for your natural hair. You also, it also is a big thing about self-worth, right? You know, like, we are beautiful and the way God made us. We shouldn't have to conform to any standard of Eurocentric beauty. And too many women in particular, but and our boys have had to do that. And so that's one thing we've done. We've also taken steps on sexual harassment and harassment in the workplace, which is a big issue. You're seeing it play out with the governor in New York right now. We've seen a whole bunch of cases. And this will lower the standard for when you can claim sexual harassment or harassment in the workplace. So in most parts of the country, there's a really high standard. It has to be severe and pervasive. So, like, you know, it has to be happening a lot and have to be really bad. And I you know, there's so many examples of when that standard wasn't met. A guy was working with his coworker. He came in her hotel room, took his clothes off, got on her bed. That was deemed not severe or pervasive enough because it happened one time. So it's just crazy stuff.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So we lowered the standard to, it had to be less than severe or pervasive, but it has to be more than something petty or small or trivial, slight, but something that was serious. And so that'll help, because then you can actually get relief and, you know, bring a claim of workplace or other harassment, and hopefully that will serve that deterrent effect, you know. And so there's more we need to do, but those are two things that I led on the county in response to some real life discrimination that people are seeing every day. You know, there's 200,000 Black people in my county that wake up every day, decide how they're going to present themselves to the world, And can I wear this hair to this job interview? Can I do that? I actually just got a report last night about at a Chick-fil-A, someone was fired because they had locks. And so we're investigating it. Now our Office of Human Rights is investigating. So it happens every day. And obviously the Me Too movement has shown the kind of sexual and harassment and discrimination women are facing in the workplace. And so I'm just trying to strengthen those protections, because I think all too often we forget about it. And it really reduces our productivity. It doesn't make people feel safe. And so it's just not a good thing for anybody. So those are a couple of things that we've done.
Yeah, no, it's like, I feel like once a month we'll see like a news story of a student being suspended for their hair or like just how they dress. And it's just, but it's great to hear that you are definitely active in protecting those things that we all do or have.
Yeah, like who we are, right?
Yeah, who we are.
It's a shame that we need protection, but we do.
Yeah, definitely.
And I know, Will, like when I first met you a while back ago, I can tell that, and I think, your broader appeal to especially people like me and people like my mother who you met, like, being a parent and a husband is a big part of your identity. Like I haven't often seen you without, Michelle or the girl. That was back when I first met you. So what, you obviously know what it's like to be a parent and to be a Black father and to be working during this pandemic. What have you kind of done, and how has that kind of experience transitioned to you kind of working on behalf of, Black and Latino working families, but especially mothers, especially as we celebrate Women's History Month? What have you kind of done during like the pandemic to kind of ease that burden? Because it is, that relates to childcare and all of these other issues, but what have kind of you done, during this time to kind of ease that burden for those people?
Oh, absolutely. Prior to my son being born, as Noah, I was in a house full of women, and it was great. My wife and my 3 daughters. And this pandemic has been brutal to women, and particularly women of color. I mentioned some of the stats earlier, the health stats, the economic stats, but just the pressures are just insane, whether it be childcare. If you look at the job losses in December, women accounted for all of the job losses. 167,000 jobs were lost. All of them were from women. Men actually gained about 20,000 jobs. If you look at childcare, if you look at trying to balance virtual school, the disproportionality of women in the hospitality industry who have to go out of the house. So it's a huge issue. We did a big forum with a whole bunch of women's groups, our Montgomery County Commission on Women, on all these issues that are impacting women during the pandemic. We elicited several kind of concrete issues and challenges and potential solutions. And I've actually commissioned our Office of Legislative Oversight to do a deep dive into the statistics here in Montgomery County about how women have been impacted in employment, in job losses, in closing of businesses, and childcare, and rent, and facing rental challenges or eviction. And so that report is being worked on now. And what we hope to do is come out with some really concrete funding and policy proposals that will help us recover equitably. Because one of the things I'm really focused on is like, all right, we're coming out now. Some people have been doing great during this pandemic, right? Like the stock market's up. If you're like wealthy, can work from home, and don't, there was a stat like Jeff Bezos, who the former, owner of Amazon, and he sold it off now. He made just between February and November, he made more money than like you could have taken, like I think it was something like $67 billion he made in that period. And so he could have paid every Amazon employee, which has like 100,000 employees. He could have paid all of them $100,000 and still been as rich as he was before the pandemic. Yeah, I mean, it's like crazy. So, and that's like a lot of people. Like if you're a millionaire, if you're, that translates down. So like some people are doing really well, but some people have really, really gotten hit hard. And so how do we make sure that we get those people back where they need to be? And women are in that category for sure, and particularly women of color. And so I'm really focused on that. And I'm trying to lift those issues up. And it's going to take years, because it's just like when we lost our housing in the economic crisis in 2008, that eradicated Black wealth, and we're still suffering from that. So we really have to focus on it, and we're going to have bolder solutions to do it.
Yeah.
I definitely agree because it's hit a lot of people. And like you said, I think it depends on where you're at economically, how it affected you. Because for some people it has been a blessing, and then for others it's been very detrimental. So it's good to hear that like you're actively working to ease the burdens, because Noah has been laughing like, bro, like that was the last stimmy we gonna get. Like, what we gonna do, bro?
Well, you got another one coming. Y'all get your checks yet?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, wait, what do you mean? Another one after this
We don't-
14?
No, the 1,400. Did you get
Oh,
that?
yeah, we got
You already
that one.
spent- you
I
already
thought you
spent that.
meant
You already
another
spent
one.
Yeah, I'm like, hold on, you got some more information I need to find out about.
I missed that breaking news alert.
So like last month, you announced that you'll be publishing a book in the spring entitled Black Fathers. Can you share what inspired you to like write that story, or just what
Yeah.
would you like go with that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm writing it now, actually. Probably when I get off with y'all, I'm gonna go back to writing it. It's called My Black Fathers: The 7 Men Who Made Me Whole. It's really it's a memoir. It's a story about my life, but told through the lens of these 7 Black men, 2 of whom are my biological father and one's my stepfather. My parents divorced when I was 6, and then the first one actually is one of the first chapter is about Mr. Williams, the only Black male teacher I ever had in the 4th grade, my math teacher, who taught me how to tie a tie, and taught me the first person I witnessed code switch when he was talking to the janitor in slang, and then how he talked in the classroom. And he just taught me a lot of things, even in that short period of time that I was with him. And then the last one is Barack Obama, who I worked for in the Senate when he was a senator, and went in the White House. And when I was working for him, I got married, had several of my children, and he just was a really important mentor in guiding me through how to be in policy, how to be an attorney, how to be a dad, and balance all those things. And it's really a goal to tell my story which is an interesting story, but also to tell, the truth about Black masculinity, about fatherhood. It's a story of redemption. I was very estranged from my dad early on, and we came back, and I took care of him when he got cancer the last several years of his life, and he lived with us. So it'll tell that story, but really kind of to debunk some of these myths about Black men and fatherhood, and to tell the rich story and complicated story and sad story, and about how the society has impacted these relationships. And obviously you can't tell the story about Black fatherhood without talking about women and their role in the family. So it's going to be a holistic story, but I don't think there's been anything quite written that I've seen that's focused on the Black fatherhood relationship. And even though many of these men are not my father, they were fathers for me, and they helped me and are still helping me. That's the other point, that it doesn't end. It's a continuous process of support and mentorship, and wholeness, and a journey towards wholeness. So I think it'll be an interesting story. There'll be some good anecdotes and things in there, and some life lessons, and I hope you guys read it. I mean, come back on next year and talk about it.
Yeah, I'm waiting on my signed copy, like.
Please do. So
Got it.
That's all the questions that we have for you. I think, our listeners are really going to enjoy this episode. We can tell that already. But I think, how do, not only your constituents, but just, supporters of you, how do we stay in contact with you and make sure that we're aware of all of the great work that you're doing?
Awesome. Yeah, no, so I'm easy to find. I'm just at Will Jawando. So WILLJAWANDO on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. And you can just type in Will Jawando on Google. You get my office line if you live in Maryland or Montgomery County, and you can reach out to us there as well. But I don't have a TikTok, but you can get me on Instagram. So yeah, when we respond, so that's the easiest way to get me.
Awesome. So once again, Councilman Will Jawando, thank you for joining us. So be sure to follow us on Twitter at WRGO, and Instagram on the same handle. Be sure to check out our new merch that once again celebrates change agents in Georgia. You can check that out at what'sreallygoingonpod.com. Be sure to subscribe and listen on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Google Play. Thank you.